Hey everybody, my name is James. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the topic of stop motion animation and claymation. We'll talk about what that is, as well as the origin story behind it, and some examples. So to first kind of dive in with some examples as a memory jog, you've probably seen stop motion animation and claymation used in characters like Wallace and Gromit, who were created by Aardman Animations back in the mid-1990s. However, Wallace and Gromit, although very famous to stop motion animation and claymation, were created by British artists over in Britain. Um, and so, British production, American animation history course. Will we be covering Wallace and Gromit in this course? No. And we won't be covering them in this presentation either. So we will be covering, though, some great production companies as well as some great characters that are relevant to American animation in terms of stop motion animation and claymation. So those relevant examples are going to be characters created by Clokey Productions, such as Davy and Goliath, as well as Gumby and Pokey, who Gumby you've probably seen that green character before. Maybe Davy and Goliath you haven't, but that's okay. You'll learn more about them in presentation 2 and why Clokey Productions is so significant to the world of stop motion animation and claymation. Moving along the timeline to the mid-1960s, we see Rankin Bass creating holiday films like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, as well as in the early 1970s, a film like Santa Claus is Coming to Town, where the characters, the environment were all made using stop-motion animation, but also claymation. So, what is stop-motion animation and claymation? Well, stop-motion animation is the technique that is used. So that is where you take a photo, you move an object, you take a photo, move the object, so that all those photos of the object, when strung together, create the impression of movement for that object, which is neat. Then claymation is using clay as a primary material, so plastine clay, which we'll talk about in a second, to create that impression of movement. So characters or environments, such as trees or houses or whatever, can be made out of that clay. So that's where the claymation comes in, is that use of clay and the use of the stop motion technique to create a production. So claymation, a great example of that, to break it down, is going to be this graphic here, where you see the wire armature which functions as a skeleton, and then that plastine clay wraps around it to create either whatever set piece you're going to use in filming. So the plastine clay was created by a British artist named William Harbit, who is pictured here. William Harbit back in 1897, wanted to create a clay for his own personal use as an artist that would not dry out over time or would not harden. This was a success. He did create plastine clay, which is a clay that remains flexible through its entire lifetime, and so became very popular in claymation and is still used today to create those great characters like we just saw earlier, but also productions even today. So hats off to that guy for creating plastine clay so we could use it for those productions and current ones today. So moving into more of the film aspect of it, we see a man named Walter R. Booth, who used maybe not plastine clay, but he did use clay as a material to create a very early film called Animated Putty back in 1911. So he used clay here to create this film, and obviously clay doesn't move on its own unless, like gravity could pull it down. But that's beside the point. The point is that, Walter Booth, and when he created this film, had to move the clay a little bit, and then use stop motion animation to piece all those photos together and create this film. And so this is a very, very early example of stop motion animation and claymation. So it's maybe not as engaging as we would see in something like Wallace and Gromit or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or Santa Claus is Coming to Town, but still a very early milestone and very important highlight in the timeline and origin story of stop motion animation and claymation. So now that you have a brief foundation on the topic of stop motion animation and claymation, and if you are interested in learning more about the topic, I recommend staying tuned for presentation 2, which will cover Clokey Productions, explaining characters like David and Goliath as well as Gumby and Pokey, their significance to American animation, and then later presentation 3, Rankin Bass, looking at Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, that production, as well as Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and looking at why those films are also significant. So as a whole, those examples we covered today, why they're so significant to animation in America in regards to stop motion animation and claymation. So, like I said, stay tuned and hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thanks.